James, hell has frozen over because I am about to say something positive about a King of England, which I have never done before, never expected to, but then came today. And so a King of England has finally earned some positive words for me, and his speechwriters, I will praise to the high heavens.
I mean, before this speech today, I think said to our team of incredible producers, there's not going to be anything interesting out of this speech. It will be boring pablum. And I was wrong. And I'm happy to admit I was wrong. We talked about it too, but I can't wait to see what you have to say about it.
And Jen, there's some fascinating ways in which he actually echoed his mother, who was the only other British monarch who ever spoke to a joint session. We're going to hear some of what she had to say, which in its way is a rebuke of Donald Trump from the grave.
That certainly is. There was you had to listen to hear it, but certainly a burn in there. And I didn't even know that. I'll be excited to watch and see what you play from her as well.
We're going to get to it. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. And so on this day in American history, a number became illegal. Or maybe just photographing that number became illegal, or maybe seashells became illegal. It's hard to tell because the single most childish indictment in the history of federal law was revealed today by someone who proved himself to future historians to be the most incompetent head of the Justice Department in history, including 2 Nixon Republican attorneys general who were found guilty of crimes. Donald Trump's acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who was Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, who got him 34 guilty verdicts, put his application to become Donald Trump's permanent attorney general in writing today in the form of an indictment of former FBI Director James Comey that makes the number you see over my shoulder at the moment, which I dare not say, a crime. If that number is placed in proximity to other numbers, or probably, in fact, definitely, the word Trump. And I am going to say the word Trump tonight, repeatedly. And to preserve one of the most important personal distinctions I have that makes me very different from Donald Trump, I'm not saying better, just different, the distinction that I have never been indicted. To preserve my never indicted status, I will never say that illegal number again, even though it was briefly my number as a tight end in high school before it was switched to number 81. NFL team lawyers must already be getting ready to take a position on the sidelines to make sure that anyone in the NFL with that number on his back is never beside anyone with this number on his back. Because if 2 NFL players stand beside each other with those 2 numbers on their backs, they can now be charged with committing the federal crime of threatening the life of the President of the United States. And if any college player or NFL player with that number that begins with 8 ever tackles or in any way harms a player with that number that begins with 4, that player is going to end up with the James Comey indictment. The 2-count indictment, one of threatening the life of a president, and 2, the second one, transmitting that threat through interstate electronic communication, which is to say, a televised football game. Put those 2 numbers together in a televised football game, and you have that federal crime. That is life in the country that Donald Trump and his criminal defense lawyer turned acting attorney general now want you to live in. And into that country today stepped the King of England, who played an unprecedented part in another desperately humiliating day for Donald Trump's Washington. And for once, the King himself was not the humiliated one. No one humiliates Trump lawyers more than Donald Trump. And he could not have done more to humiliate the already humiliated Todd Blanche than he did today by getting the goofiest indictment America has ever seen out of Todd Blanche after literally years of Donald Trump urging the indictment of James Comey. And Donald Trump's humiliation today was delivered to him by his guest of honor, the King of England, who for the first time in my life made me feel something akin to gratitude to a British monarch and outright awe for his speechwriters. The speechwriters had the task of telling the truth in a chamber where half of the members applaud and cheer Donald Trump's pathological lies. And today, the King of England and his speechwriters had those same Republicans applauding sharp criticism and complete disagreement with Donald Trump.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the United Nations Security Council was united in the face of terror, we answered the call together, as our people have done so for more than a century, shoulder to shoulder, through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, and moments that have defined our shared security. Today, Mr. Speaker, that same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people. It is needed in order to secure a truly just and lasting peace.
Standing ovation from J.D. Vance, who has said, I don't care about Ukraine. Standing ovation from those Republicans. And now we know you can get the Republicans in that room to applaud what reads like a Biden State of the Union address. You can get the Republicans in that room to applaud a speech that completely contradicts Donald Trump if the speech is delivered in a posh British accent. This was the day that I hope at least some high school kids were watching. American high school kids who have grown up in the dark shadow of Donald Trump. High school kids who in most of their lifetimes now have been living under a Donald Trump presidency filled with uncouth public profanity and rank stupidity and an inability to simply read the words put in front of him by his speechwriters and skip the idiotic ad libs.
My mother had a crush on Charles. Can you believe it? Amazing how, I wonder what she's thinking right now.
If you are a high school kid in America, I now have 2 King speeches to recommend to you. First, the wonderful film about the King, who was a genuine inspiration to the British during World War II, titled The King's Speech, and today's speech by Charles, where he faithfully delivered every word his speechwriters gave him with no wise guy side comments, no threats of war crimes, no statement he could not support with facts. And most of all, with the kind of dignity that every previous American president either had or was able to do a reasonable imitation of in that room where Charles spoke today. You will not see an honest speech delivered from that podium again during this presidency. With Donald Trump threatening to destroy NATO, Charles said this.
From the depths of the Atlantic to the disastrously melting ice caps of the Arctic, the commitment and expertise of the United States Armed Forces and its allies lie at the heart of NATO, pledged to each other's defense, protecting our citizens and interests, keeping North Americans and Europeans safe from our common adversaries.
Donald Trump recently said, and these are his exact words, NATO is shameful. His vice president has said, I don't really care about what happens in Ukraine. And the Republican Party in that chamber today rose to their feet to applaud NATO and applaud support for Ukraine. And Charles was merely echoing his mother, the only other British monarch ever to address a joint session of Congress, which she did in May of 1991.
NATO, too, is adapting to the new realities in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and to changing attitudes in the West. It is Britain's prime concern to ensure that the new Europe is open and liberal, and that it works in growing harmony with the United States and the other members of the Atlantic community. All our history in this and earlier centuries underlines the basic point that the best progress is made when Europeans and Americans act in concert. We must not allow ourselves to be enticed into a form of continental insularity.
Donald Trump wouldn't understand the word insularity, but that is Queen Elizabeth speaking against Donald Trump's insularity in his America First concept and his America Alone madness, as her son did today.
I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world. And that we ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking.
Charles smiled through an appearance with Donald Trump at the White House before heading to the Capitol today.
Then you're going over to Congress and you're going to make a speech that's going to make everybody very envious of that beautiful accent of yours. Very elegant. He's a very elegant man.
That's all Donald Trump can hear. The accent. Donald Trump's listening comprehension is probably close to zero, so in a speech done with that accent, in a non-lecturing tone, Donald Trump doesn't know when he is being rebuked.
The U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances.
Standing ovation for checks and balances, cheering for checks and balances. There you have congressional Republicans joined by Democrats cheering checks and balances on Donald Trump, written into our Constitution, thanks to the inspiration of the British, while Donald Trump, in every day of his presidency, finds a way to try to violate those checks and balances, to try to destroy those checks and balances. And here's Charles rebuking Donald Trump's patently insane claim that climate science is a hoax.
Even as we celebrate the beauty that surrounds us, our generation must decide how to address the collapse of critical natural systems, which threatens far more than the harmony and essential diversity of nature. We ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems, in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security.
Jack Royston, Newsweek's chief royal correspondent, who contributed to our coverage of that speech earlier today, and who hangs on every word and studies those words more closely than the rest of us, with a full understanding of the King's speechwriter's surgical precision, found what he believes is a reference to the Epstein survivors in the King's speech, a reference that was confirmed to him from a source close to the King's speechwriters. Charles has shunned his younger brother Andrew and removed his titles this year after the release of the Epstein files deepened our understanding of Andrew's friendship with the sex trafficker and raper of children Jeffrey Epstein, who was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. Virginia Giuffre accused Andrew of sexual assault, which Andrew has denied. Virginia Giuffre took her own life last year. And her brother was one of the people who was hoping to meet with Charles, along with Epstein survivors, during this royal visit to the United States. Like Donald Trump, Charles refuses to meet with Jeffrey Epstein's survivors, but according to Jack Royston's reporting in Newsweek today, this line you're about to hear was meant as an acknowledgement of what the Epstein survivors have endured.
In both of our countries, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse, and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both our societies today.
In his reporting today, Jack Royston quotes a royal aide saying that line was about the Epstein survivors. Quote, "It was certainly in His Majesty's mind to acknowledge victims of abuse, so they are naturally incorporated in this line." It's not much. In fact, it is very, very little. It couldn't be smaller. It's the smallest and most indirect acknowledgement of the Epstein survivors' suffering that the speechwriters could have come up with. But it's something. It is more than Donald Trump has ever said about them. Charles's fifth great-grandfather was the King of England during the American Revolution. King George lost his mind during his rule. He was literally insane, which was dramatized in the wonderful 1991 play by the British playwright Alan Bennett titled The Madness of George III. And here we are, 250 years after the madness of King George III helped drive the American colonies into revolution against the crown. And when Charles became the first British king to address the Congress today, he found the madness on this side of the Atlantic. Senator Gary Peters, who was in the House chamber today for the King's speech, will join us next. It shows the lowest approval rating ever recorded for Donald Trump in that poll at 34%. And a significant number of Republican voters who don't support Donald Trump's war in Iran apparently might include his Republican Vice President, James David Vance. The Atlantic is reporting. In closed-door meetings, J.D. Vance has repeatedly questioned the Defense Department's depiction of the war in Iran and whether the Pentagon has understated what appears to be the drastic depletion of U.S. missile stockpiles. Two senior administration officials told us that the vice president has queried the accuracy of the information the Pentagon has provided about the war. He has also expressed his concerns about the availability of certain missile systems in discussions with President Trump. Several people familiar with the situation told us at least some of the sources for the Atlantic's reporting are people close to Vice President Vance, who would like you to know that the future candidate for president does not support Donald Trump's war, but he doesn't want to be caught saying that publicly. Quote, Vance's advisors who spoke with us on the condition of anonymity told us that the vice president has presented his concerns as his own rather than accusing Hegseth or Kaine of misleading the president. Vance is trying, the advisors suggested, to avoid making this personal or to create divisions in Trump's war cabinet. Some of Vance's confidants, however, believe that Hegseth's portrayal has been so positive as to be misleading. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. He's the ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee and a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to get to your assessment about what you have heard from Pete Hegseth, along with what might be the vice president's assessment of that. But let's begin with what you heard in that chamber today. With the king managing to get Republicans on their feet in standing ovations for lines that could have been taken from Joe Biden's State of the Union addresses.
You're absolutely right. It was quite striking to see the applause that we were getting from the other side. One that really struck me, and you mentioned it in the opening, is when he talked about the checks and balances in the system. I mean, it's clear that there is no checks and balances when it comes to Republican members of Congress. Our founders were not really, they didn't trust any of us. They believed that all three branches had to compete with each other to make sure they kept a check on everybody. They expected Congress to be the most effective check on the president. They always thought Congress was the preeminent of the three branches, Article 1, and that Congress folks would never really cede their power to an executive. But that's exactly what we've been seeing when it comes to the power of the purse, when it comes to war powers. You can't get Republicans that are willing to step up and actually check those powers, unlike anything we have seen throughout the history of this country. And so to have them stand up and actually applaud, I'm like, where did these individuals come from? And I also appreciated the fact that he was trying to bring us together to strengthen NATO and understand that we are stronger when we are all united. And the long history that the UK has had with the United States for 200 plus years. And all during that time, we stood close with our ally. We understood that when we come together with other European countries as well, that we are stronger. And then NATO has been really a preeminent force in maintaining peace for decades. And they stood up for it, but you certainly would not expect that given the rhetoric that we hear from Congress, and certainly the comments that we hear from President Trump on a nearly daily basis.
So Charles's mother, Elizabeth, in her address to the joint session in 1991, which was in May, just this time of year, she directly praised the President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, and praised him specifically for the joint effort that the British made with then President Bush in pushing Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So this was the first Gulf War in which the British joined as allies in the American effort to push Saddam out of Kuwait. And she was very positive about the British contribution, about that. Nothing like that today while Donald Trump's war is going on.
No, absolutely, because there can't be. The president never reached out to our allies. Well, he never reached out to the American people. If he's not reaching out to the American people, he's not going to reach out to allies. But in the past, as you've known, you mentioned what happened with President Bush, but the UK has always stood side by side with the United States in conflict. It is one of our strongest allies, but if you don't try to bring your ally into a conflict that you believe is absolutely critical for world stability, don't expect them to be there for us. And in fact, if you look at public opinion polls in these countries, I was recently in both Sweden and in Italy. In both of those countries, based on our embassy, the public opinion of the United States, our approval rating is less than 20%. Over 80% of these longtime allies say that you can't trust the United States. You don't know if we're going to be a friend that'll actually stand with them, and we're no longer a world leader. All of the goodwill that we have seen for so many years that we have built up with our allies is disappearing and is fraying on a daily basis because of one guy, Donald Trump.
So when you hear, you've got your Republican colleagues there today, they're standing with you, they're cheering with you for checks and balances on the president. They're cheering for support for Ukraine. They're cheering for these lines that if spoken by Joe Biden, they would ignore them. They might even heckle him. What is it? How are we supposed to know what they actually think? Is it just the accent that got them clapping today?
I don't know, but I think one thing, and actually the king mentioned, he quoted that you can't judge somebody by their words, you can only judge them by their actions. And so clearly the actions of what we have seen by my colleagues, my Republican colleagues in the Congress speak louder than them standing up and clapping. I like to see that. But I'd love to actually see action and actually have them actively engaged in pushing back when the president usurps powers that was granted to the people's house, to the United States Congress. They don't do that. I've also found that many of my colleagues have a lot more courage when I'm in the elevator with them, and they may say comments about the president, something that they don't particularly agree with. But then when the elevator door opens, they will talk their talking points. So I call it elevator courage. I want to stop seeing elevator courage. I want to see real courage where you stand up and push back and understand that our constitutional system does not work if there are not checks and balances. And I'm very fearful for what's going to happen in the future if this continues down this course. But, ultimately, we know the ultimate check, the checks and balances, and according to Thomas Jefferson, for example, said the ultimate check is the people. So it is really ultimately about elections. And you put on the approval rating earlier. It's at an incredibly low number. The key thing now is for the American people to turn out in huge numbers during the midterm and send the strongest signal possible that we need to have checks and balances. So we're going to change the majority. We're going to have a Democratic majority in the House and in the Senate, and really send a strong message to the president that his actions are no longer acceptable to the vast majority of the American people.
The secrets of the Senate elevators, the senators only elevators, as they are, restricted to senators only in the office buildings and in the Capitol. That's where the truth happens. Senator Gary Peters, thanks for reminding us of that. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, Congressman Ro Khanna will not let the king forget the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and the king's brother, Andrew. Congressman Khanna joins us next. Wherever and however perpetrated, the letter said, it added that because of ongoing police inquiries in the United Kingdom, King Charles was unable to meet survivors or comment directly on the matters under inquiry. Today, Congressman Khanna met with women who survived convicted child sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell's abuse and Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. Virginia Giuffre's brother said this.
Virginia was recruited at Mar-a-Lago by Ghislaine Maxwell and quickly pulled into orbit of Jeffrey Epstein. What followed was not just abuse by them, but by many powerful individuals, many of whom have still not been brought to justice. This is how trafficking works. Survivors are groomed. They are manipulated into believing they are complicit in their own abuse. They are isolated, controlled, and threatened. I remember one moment that has stayed with me forever, when Epstein handed Virginia a photo of me as a child, wearing my backpack on my way to elementary school. It wasn't just a picture, it was a message, a threat, a way to keep her silent by making her fear for the people she loved. Virginia was trafficked across countries, including to the United Kingdom, where she was abused by Prince Andrew, now former Prince Andrew. There's a difficult irony in all of this. Virginia was recruited from a property owned by Donald Trump and trafficked to a member of the British royal family. Yet today, survivors are here, sitting with members of Congress, still fighting to be heard, still pushing for real accountability.
Joining us now is